Well, the short answer is no, absolutely not. And listen, you have to understand what gold is. And again, there are a lot of misconceptions about what the utility of gold is for investors. And first we need to clarify one big misconception. It's not the gold price that you need to be looking at. You need to be looking at how it's measured against certain currencies at certain points in history. And let me give you an example, because it makes a huge difference into the reason why you need to own gold. So let's take the Argentine peso, which Michael loves to use as a means of demonstrating what happens to currencies when they get into trouble, when they're mismanaged, much like what the US dollar is experiencing today. The Argentine peso, gold in Argentine peso terms has gone up 28-fold in the last 10 years. Take a more recent example, the Turkish lira, which is experiencing its own currency crisis at the moment. It's gone up 4-fold in the period. Gold measured in lira terms has gone up 4-fold in a period of 4 years. That's how you measure the true value of gold. Also, you need to understand what happens during periods of high inflation. That's when gold performs really well. The last time we experienced that here in North America was in the 1970s, and when gold went from $35 to $850, that's 25-fold, because we had high inflation. Now, we haven't seen in this current cycle high CPI inflation yet. All of the inflation has gone into assets, and that's why we have all of these asset bubbles happening, which one could claim Bitcoin as an asset bubble. And so you really have to understand that part of it, because that's when it's going to become evident. Now, just a little fun fact, traditionally, and when we talk about what happened with gold last year, when gold has a big down dip, central banks and jewelers come in and buy on the down dip, and they buy big. And we saw this recently with both the jewelry buyers out of India buying record amounts this last month, and with the central banks declaring that on the down dip, they continue to buy at a furious pace. Now, contrast that with Bitcoin. And so when you talk about performance with respect to Bitcoin, it's not an appropriate term. Bitcoin has not been around long enough to be able to determine its utility as a store of value. And I don't buy the argument that a mere 10 years of history is going to be enough to indicate what the future performance is going to be. It's just silly. It's never been properly tested. So is Bitcoin impacting the price of gold? I think partially yes. I have a good friend of mine who's an economist who recently did a regression analysis on attributing what factors affected gold and why gold turned down. And it was about 40% was attributed to higher bond yields. 36% was to a higher US dollar, which was temporary, and 24% was attributed to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is having an impact, and I can't deny it, but I actually think this is more of a North American perspective than it is a global perspective in terms of this rush into Bitcoin. It's worth noting that the US dollar is still benefiting from its premier reserve currency status. But as the world starts to fragment, the global monetary system starts to fragment, and you have countries like China, Russia, and Iran all looking to decouple from the US dollar for a whole number of reasons. As that fragmentation takes place and less trading is done with US dollars, the dollar will come under pressure, and especially with this money growth that we're talking about. Now, most Americans will only see that when it happens to the US dollar. They will only see the value of gold when it's measured against US dollars. Americans have a very funny way of seeing everything in US dollar terms. On the volatility side, I mean, people have very short memories. Sure, Bitcoin's done very well the last couple of years, but if you take points throughout the last 10 years, it's had stomach-churning roller coaster ride, and there's no reason why that won't continue. And so I can't see why anybody would invest in Bitcoin if the objective was to preserve value. Now, on a personal note, Michael, I think you're fighting the wrong fight. Gold is the least of your worries. You need to keep your eye on central banks and governments, because they're going to be the ones that you need to look out for. And I know that Jerome Powell has been dismissing Bitcoin as he dismisses gold as both speculation vehicles. And he's doing the same thing that every other one of his predecessors did, disparages gold, now it's Bitcoin. While they're in office, you know, Alan Greenspan was a gold bug before, then a gold bug after, but during his time as chairman of the Fed, he was disparaging gold. And they do that because it is a threat, and especially if it becomes too popular. So I think investors really need to ask themselves, if they're looking to store value, which one's better, gold or Bitcoin?
Thank you,
I'm
Frank.
choosing gold unless you have some way to change my mind. I still choose gold.